Senator Kennedy, with all due respect, which is none, you sit there with your fake country boy act and your fake Oxford degree, pretending to be some simple lawyer from the bayou. Congresswoman Maxine Waters delivered this opening salvo with the confidence of someone who had spent 3 decades in Congress without real consequence. The California representative chair of the House Financial Services Committee and self-proclaimed champion of the poor stood at the witness table in the Senate Appropriations Committee hearing room, her finger jabbing the air like a prosecutor making a closing argument. You represent the poorest state in America because you keep them poor and ignorant with your votes. She continued, her voice rising. That ridiculous draw. We all know you went to Vanderbilt and Oxford. Stop insulting our intelligence by cosplaying as some plantation overseer who stumbled into the Senate. And the hearing was supposed to be a routine oversight session on financial services regulation. Senator Kennedy, as a senior member of the Appropriations Committee, had invited Waters to testify about her committee's work. Instead, it had become her personal stage for political theater. Waters' staff was recording everything for social media. Her communications director was already crafting tweets with hashtags Maxine drags Kennedy and Hap Bayou were ready to go viral. The gallery packed with her supporters applauded after each barb. Kennedy sat quietly at his elevated seat, looking down at the witness through reading glasses perched on his nose. He wore a rumpled brown suit that had clearly seen better days. A yellow legal pad before him, covered in what appeared to be doodles. To casual observers, he looked exactly like what Waters claimed a country bumpkin accidentally elected to high office. Now, Congresswoman, Kennedy began in his thick Louisiana drawl. I don't think there's any call for reclaiming my time. Waters shouted, using her famous phrase like a weapon. I don't need lectures from someone who votes against every program that helps working families. You vote with your Republican friends to cut food stamps, cut health care, cut education, while you probably drink your tea with your pinky up at some country club. Laughter rippled through the gallery. Kennedy appeared flustered, shuffling papers awkwardly. Ma'am, if you just let me. Reclaiming my time. Waters interrupted again, playing to her audience. I've been fighting for the people since before you figured out which fork to use at your fancy Oxford dinners. I grew up poor, one of 13 children raised by a single mother in St. Louis. I worked in garment factories and as a telephone operator. I know what real struggle is. She turned to the gallery, her voice dripping with theatrical indignation. This man represents Louisiana, 49 out of 50 states in poverty, education, health care, and he has the audacity to question me about financial services. I chair the committee that oversees the entire financial industry. I've served in Congress for 33 years. I've chaired the Congressional Black Caucus. More applause. Kennedy waited patiently, occasionally jotting something on his legal pad. Senator Kennedy Waters continued, her tone shifting to mock sympathy. Maybe you're just confused. Maybe all that catfish and crawfish has clogged up your thinking. So, let me speak slowly so you can understand. I fight for the people. What do you fight for? Tax cuts for the rich. Oil companies. You're a walking stereotype of everything wrong with the South. Chairman Lindsey Graham tapped his gavel weakly. Congresswoman Waters, if you could please. I'm answering the senator's questions. Otter snapped. Or I would be if he could formulate a coherent question beyond. Well, now and I reckon. The insult drew gasps even from some Democrats in the room. But Waters was rolling now high on her own performance, feeding off the energy of her supporters. You know what I think? She leaned forward, staring directly at Kennedy. I think you resent powerful black women. I think you can't stand that someone like me, someone who actually pulled herself up by her bootstraps, instead of inheriting a law practice, has real power in Washington. You probably thought you could intimidate me with this little hearing, make me look small. Well, Senator, I don't get small, I get loud. Throughout this tirade, Kennedy had continued his doodling, occasionally looking up with an expression of mild confusion. He now reached slowly into his jacket pocket and pulled out an old pocket watch, checking the time with deliberate care. Are you even listening to me? Waters demanded. Or are you just waiting for your afternoon nap? Kennedy looked up, his eyes twinkling behind those reading glasses. Oh, I'm listening, Congresswoman. I'm listening real careful. He set the pocket watch down next to a manila folder that had been sitting on his desk all along. The folder was marked in neat handwriting, M. Waters, Financial investigation. For the first time, Waters' confidence flickered just for a moment. Now, Congresswoman Kennedy said, his voice still soft and folksy. You mentioned you've been fighting for the people for a long time. That's mighty admirable. And you chair that important Financial Services Committee. That's a powerful position. That's right, Waters said, recovering her composure. And I use that power to help working families unlike. So maybe you could help this simple country lawyer understand something. Kennedy continued opening the folder with careful precision. Inside were neatly organized stacks of bank records, photographs, property documents, and what appeared to be emailed transcripts. Because I've been doing a little research of my own. The room went quiet. The seasoned reporters leaned forward. They'd seen Kennedy do this before. They knew what came next. You mentioned you grew up poor, Kennedy said, pulling out the first document. And I respect that. I truly do. Hard work and determination. That's the American dream right there. He paused, looking up at her. So maybe you could explain to this confused country boy how someone who fights so hard for the poor. He held up a photograph of a massive mansion lives in a $4.5 million house in Hancock Park. Waters' face went from triumphant to tight in an instant. That's none of your and that's just where we're starting. Congresswoman, Kennedy said, his draw somehow becoming both gentler and more dangerous. See, you mentioned my fake Oxford degree. Well, let me tell you something about Oxford. They teach you to read real careful, to follow the money, to ask simple questions. He tapped the folder. And I've got a whole lot of simple questions about your finances, your family, your bank dealings, and your friends in Cuba who kill police officers. The gallery erupted. Waters' staff was frantically whispering to her. Her social media coordinator had stopped filming. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, his folksy demeanor firmly in place. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with something simple. Let's talk about a bank called One United. You remember One United, don't you, Congresswoman? The smile had completely vanished from Waters' face. In that instant, the hunter realized she had just become the prey. Kennedy removed his reading glasses and cleaned them slowly with a handkerchief he'd pulled from his pocket. It was a deliberate gesture, letting the tension build in the room. When he replaced them on his nose, he looked like a kindly grandfather about to tell a bedtime story. Now, Congresswoman, he began, his voice full of gentle confusion. I'm just a simple lawyer from Louisiana. So maybe you can help me understand this banking thing. It's awful complicated for us country folk. Waters had regained some composure. Senator, I've spent decades working on financial services legislation. If you have actual questions instead of, oh, I've got questions, Kennedy interrupted mildly. Real simple ones. See, back in 2008 during that financial crisis, we had this TARP program, Troubled Asset Relief Program, bailout money for banks that were struggling. You remember that? Of course, I remember. I was intimately involved in crafting that legislation to help banks. Yes, ma'am, Kennedy nodded. Now, one of those banks was called One United, based in Boston, but had operations in Los Angeles. You familiar with One United? A pause. The room was silent. I'm familiar with many minority-owned banks that were struggling during the crisis. I'm sure you are, Kennedy said agreeably, but I'm asking specifically about One United. Let me help refresh your memory. He pulled out a document. Your husband, Ambassador Sidney Williams, he was on the board of One United from 2004 to 2008. Is that correct? My husband has had a distinguished career in just a yes or no would be fine. Ma'am, was he on the board? Yes, but and he owned stock in the bank. Quite a bit of stock. In fact, Kennedy consulted his papers. According to your own financial disclosure forms, between $250 and $500 worth of stock as of the end of 2007. Does that sound about right? Waters' lawyer was whispering urgently in her ear. She ignored him. My husband's investments are properly disclosed and completely legal. I'm sure they are, Kennedy said with a smile. Now, here's what puzzles me. In September 2008, One United was in trouble. Real bad trouble. They'd invested heavily in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac stock. And when those companies collapsed, well, he shrugged. Your husband's investment was heading toward worthless. That $350 or so was about to become $0. That's a lot of money to lose. Even for folks who aren't poor anymore. He pulled out another document. So on September 9, 2008, You called Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson. Set up a meeting for September 12th. Now you told the Treasury this meeting was to discuss problems facing minority-owned banks in general. Is that your recollection? I have always advocated for minority-owned institutions that face systemic. But here's what's interesting. Kennedy continued as if she hadn't spoken. When that meeting happened, and neither you nor Secretary Paulson attended. By the way, the only bank directly represented was One United. Not multiple banks, just One United. He displayed a document on the screen behind him. Meeting attendees from the National Bankers Association. Kevin Cohey, CEO of One United. Robert Cooper, attorney for One United, and 3 other representatives. All with ties to One United. Waters shifted in her seat. Now, maybe that's coincidence, Kennedy said thoughtfully. But here's what really confuses this simple country lawyer. You had a conversation with Congressman Barney Frank Goodman, chairman of the Financial Services Committee at the time. You told him, and I'm quoting from his testimony here, I should say no to helping them because Sidney's been on the board. Kennedy looked up, his eyes sharp despite the folksy draw. So, you knew you had a conflict of interest. Congressman Frank even told you, quote, it's clearly a conflict of interest problem. Stay out of it. His words, not mine, but you called Secretary Paulson anyway. Why is that? I was representing the interests of all minority banks. Were you now? Kennedy pulled out more papers. Because in December 2008, One United received $12.1 million in TARP funds. And here's the fascinating part. Congresswoman, I had my staff. Yes, ma'am, even as hillbillies have staff analyze all 363 banks that received TARP money in the fourth quarter of 2008. A chart appeared on the screen behind him. One United had the worst Tier 1 capital ratio of any bank that got bailout money. 1.8%. The worst. It was rated less than satisfactory by federal regulators. It had ineffective underwriting standards. It was engaged in speculative investment practices. By every measure, One United was the least qualified bank to receive taxpayer money. He leaned forward. In fact, of all 987 banks that received TARP funds between October 2008 and December 2009, not a single one had a worse financial position than One United when they got their bailout. Not one. Waters tried to interrupt, but Kennedy held up a hand. Now, Secretary Paulson said something interesting in his testimony. He said he didn't know about your husband's connection to One United when he approved that meeting. The Treasury officials at the meeting didn't know either. Funny thing about that, Kennedy's folksy demeanor was slipping away, revealing something harder underneath. Let's talk about One United's leadership. CEO Kevin Cohey. He had a company financed Porsche. A Santa Monica beachfront mansion also company financed. The bank had squandered $52 million on Fannie and Freddie stock right before they collapsed. But somehow this was the bank that just had to be saved with taxpayer money. He pulled out emails. Here's where it gets really interesting. Your grandson Michael Moore, who also happens to be your chief of staff. He was in contact with One United executives throughout September 2008. He sent them draft TARP legislation. He helped them position for the bailout. One email from One United's counsel to your grandson reads, "Thank you for all your hard work." Kennedy looked directly at Waters. Your grandson, your employee, your chief of staff coordinating a bailout for a bank where your husband was a board member and stockholder. And you expect us to believe you knew nothing about it? Mail acted without my direct knowledge on some ma'am with respect. That's not credible. You're one of the smartest, most politically savvy people in Congress. You don't get to chair the Financial Services Committee by being oblivious to what your own chief of staff does. Especially when that chief of staff is your grandson. He held up another document. The House Ethics Committee charged you with 3 violations in 2010. 3 counts of using your office for personal gain, violating the spirit of House rules, and bringing discredit to the House. But here's the fascinating part. The case got delayed and delayed and delayed some more. Kennedy's voice had lost all its folksy charm now. Your colleague, Congresswoman Zoe Lufgren, helped stall the investigation, fired 2 attorneys who were building the case. And finally, in 2012, you were cleared when a lawyer decided you thought you were helping all minority banks. Not just your husband's bank. He spread his hands. Never mind that only One United was at the meeting. Never mind the emails. Never mind that your grandson coordinated everything. Never mind that Barney Frank warned you it was a conflict of interest. You thought wrong, so everything's fine. Kennedy pulled out one more document. A bank failure report. One United barely survived even with that $12 million. It eventually got shut down anyway. American taxpayers lost every penny. But your husband, he got to sell his stock before it became worthless. That's a nice outcome for the Waters family. He looked at Waters, who was now gripping the table. In Louisiana, we have an expression, "Don't piss on my boots and tell me it's raining." You used your congressional power to arrange a bailout for your husband's failing bank. You did it despite being warned it was a conflict of interest. Your grandson coordinated the whole thing from your congressional office. And when you got caught, you played the race card and said you were just trying to help minority banks. Kennedy's voice was soft again, but deadly serious. That's not helping minorities, Congresswoman, that's helping yourself. And we've got $12 million in taxpayer money that we'll never see again to prove it. Waters tried to respond, but her voice came out weak. The ethics committee cleared me. Yes, ma'am, they did. After you and your allies delayed and obstructed for 2 years. Your grandson got a letter of reproval. Basically a slap on the wrist. And you walked away clean to chair the very committee that's supposed to oversee banks. Kennedy gathered his papers. But we're just getting started. Congresswoman, because One United wasn't a one-time thing. Was it? It was a pattern. A pattern of your family getting rich off your political position while you lecture everyone else about helping the poor. He opened the second section of his folder. Let's talk about your daughter Karen and the $1 million campaign scheme. Shall we? Kennedy took a sip of water. His movements deliberate and unhurried. The reporters in the gallery were typing furiously. Waters' supporters had gone quiet. Her social media team had stopped posting. Now, Congresswoman Kennedy began his folksy manner. Returning, you've got a daughter named Karen Waters. Lovely name. I'm sure you're proud of her. Waters said nothing. Karen runs a company called Progressive Connections. Does that sound familiar? My daughter's business is her own. Oh, I'm sure it is. Kennedy said pleasantly. Real entrepreneurial spirit. Started that company back in 2003. What does Progressive Connections do exactly? When Waters didn't answer, Kennedy consulted his notes. According to your campaign finance reports, Progressive Connections provides slate mailer management services. That's a fancy way of saying they print flyers with your endorsements and mail them out. Pretty simple business. My question is, why does it cost so much? He pulled up Federal Election Commission filings on the screen. 2016, your campaign paid Progressive Connections $250. 2018, $240. 2020, $212. 2022 $190.000. He looked up. That's over $1.2 million paid to your daughter's company from your campaign funds since 2003. Campaign finance experts have reviewed these payments and found them completely legal. Legal? Yes, ma'am. I'm not disputing that. What I'm questioning is whether it's ethical. Kennedy pulled out more documents. See, I had my staff research what similar services cost from companies that aren't run by the candidate's daughter. Turns out slate mailer services typically cost about $50 to $100 per election cycle. Depending on the volume, he did the math on screen. You're paying 2 to 3 times the market rate and all that extra money going straight to your daughter. Over 20 years, your daughter has become a millionaire by overcharging your campaign for services that other companies provide for a fraction of the cost. Kennedy pulled out another document. But here's the really clever part. Most members of Congress raise money from individual donors and PACs. You do something different. You sell your endorsement. Waters stiffened. Politicians pay you to endorse them. They don't give money directly to you that would look bad. Instead, they pay slate mailer fees to be included on your endorsement flyers. Fees ranging from $25 to $45 per endorsement. He displayed a list of payments. Ed Lee, former San Francisco mayor, $37 for your endorsement. Multiple California state candidates, $25 each. Congressional candidates, $35. You've created a business model where politicians essentially purchase your endorsement by paying inflated slate mailer fees, which then go to your daughter's company. Kennedy looked at Waters. You've turned your political influence into a family franchise. Politicians pay you to endorse them. That money goes to your campaign. Your campaign pays your daughter at inflated rates. And your daughter gets rich. All perfectly legal because you helped write the loopholes. This is a gross mischaracterization. Is it? Kennedy pulled out more documents. Let's talk about your husband's post-govern career. Ambassador Sidney Williams, very distinguished, served as ambassador to the Bahamas from 1994 to 1998. After that, he became a consultant. What exactly does he consult on? Waters' lawyer was gesturing frantically. But she ignored him. According to publicly available records, Ambassador Williams has consulting contracts with several firms that have business before the Financial Services Committee. Firms that seek regulatory relief. Firms that lobby Congress. Firms that benefit from your votes. A Kennedy displayed a chart showing Williams' clients alongside Waters' committee votes. Funny thing, almost every time your husband has a consulting relationship with a company, you vote in their favor. Could be coincidence, but it happens an awful lot. He leaned back. And then there's your grandson, Mikhail Moore. We already talked about his role in the One United scandal. But let's talk about his salary. As your chief of staff, he's one of the highest paid staffers in the House. Over $170 a year. Over his career working for you, he's earned more than $1.5 million. Kennedy pulled out the House ethics rules. Now, the House has anti-nepotism rules. You can't hire your spouse, your children, or certain other relatives, but grandchildren. That's the loophole. You can hire your grandson, pay him a premium salary, and have him coordinate deals that benefit your husband's investments. He added up the numbers on screen. Karen Waters, $1.2 million in campaign payments. Sidney Williams estimated $2 million plus in consulting fees from firms you help regulate. Mikhail Moore, $1.5 million in salary. One United bailout benefit to your husband, at least $350 saved from his stock investment. The total appeared $5+ million. Your family has extracted more than $5 million through your congressional position. Meanwhile, let's look at the district you represent. A map appeared showing California's 43rd congressional district. South Los Angeles, Inglewood, Gardena, Watts. Your constituents have a median household income of $39. The poverty rate is 23%. Unemployment is over 12%. There are 15,000 homeless people in your district. Kennedy let that sink in. You lecture everyone about helping the poor. You talk about your humble roots. You attack Republicans for not caring about working families. But while your constituents struggle, the Waters family gets rich off your congressional position. He held up a report. Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington Crew. Not exactly a right-wing organization. They named you one of the most corrupt members of Congress. Multiple years, 2005, 2006, 2009, and 2011, 4 times they called you out. Waters tried to speak, but her voice was barely audible. I have devoted my life to public service. Public service that's made your family millionaires. Kennedy said quietly. That's not service, Congresswoman, that's self-service. He opened the 3rd section of his folder. But let's talk about something even more troubling. Let's talk about violence justice and your very selective outrage about both. Kennedy's demeanor shifted again. The Foley mask dropped completely. What emerged was the Oxford-educated lawyer. The man who'd argued constitutional law. The prosecutor who'd built careers on meticulous preparation. Congresswoman Waters, he began. His accent noticeably diminished. You've been very vocal about January 6, 2021. You've called it an insurrection. You've demanded harsh penalties for everyone involved. You've accused Republicans of inciting violence. Is that accurate? January 6th was an attack on our democracy. Yes or no? Please, have you been vocal about January 6th and incitement? Yes. Good. Let's talk about your history with incitement. He pulled up a video clip. April 17, 2021, Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. Protests over the shooting of Daunte Wright. The Derek Chauvin trial is ongoing. Jury deliberating. And there you are. The video played. Waters' voice filled the chamber. We've got to stay on the street. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure they know we mean business. Kennedy paused the video. This was during jury deliberations in a murder trial. You traveled to a city in crisis and told protesters to get more confrontational. And when asked what should happen if the verdict wasn't what you wanted, you said, "We cannot go away." He pulled up another document. Judge Peter Cahill, who presided over the Chauvin trial, had this to say about your comments. I'll read it directly. I wish elected officials would stop talking about this case, especially in a manner that is disrespectful to the rule of law. A congresswoman's opinion really doesn't matter a whole lot. But the problem is some of these comments give you grounds for an appeal that may result in this whole trial being overturned. Kennedy looked at Waters. The judge said your comments were abhorrent and nearly caused a mistrial. You attempted to intimidate a jury. You called for confrontation while buildings were burning and police were being injured. But when protesters you disagree with do something similar, you demand they be jailed for decades. He pulled up more footage. June 2018. Your comments about Trump administration officials. Let's hear them. Waters' voice again. If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them. Create a crowd and push back. Kennedy repeated. You called for mob harassment of government officials. And what happened? He displayed news headlines. Sarah Sanders kicked out of a restaurant. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen harassed while eating dinner. Senator Ted Cruz and his wife forced to leave a restaurant. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell confronted by a mob. Kennedy's voice was cold now. You encouraged this. You weaponized restaurant crowds against people you disagreed with politically. And when it worked, you doubled down. You said, and I quote, harassment works. He turned to face Waters fully. So, let me understand this. When you call for people to get confrontational and create crowds and push back, that's righteous protest. But when people you disagree with enter the Capitol, that's insurrection. When you try to influence a jury during deliberations, that's advocacy. But when others express opinions about trials, that's witness intimidation. Waters opened her mouth, but Kennedy wasn't finished. Let's go back further. 1992, Los Angeles riots after the Rodney King verdict. 63 people died, over 2,300 injured, $1 billion in damage. And what did you say? He pulled out news clips from 1992. You defended the Lutters. You said they had a reason to be angry. You led no justice, no peace chance. When President Bush called the rioters thugs, you said, and I quote, it only makes them madder when you call them hoodlums and thugs. Kennedy displayed photos of the devastation. Korean businesses burned to the ground. Innocent people beaten nearly to death. A city in flames. And you provided justification for it. Not once did you apologize. Not once did you say the violence was unacceptable without qualification. He created a side-by-side comparison on the screen. On one side, Waters' actions called for confrontation during jury deliberation, encouraged harassment of officials in public, defended rioters who caused 63 deaths and $1 billion in damage, led no justice, no peace rallies during active riots, said harassment works. On the other side, January 6 defendants held in solitary confinement for months, prosecuted for parading, called insurrectionists, facing decades in prison. Waters voted for Unique's committee. You see the problem, Congresswoman. People who did far less than what you encouraged are rotting in jail right now. People who never hurt anyone, never burned anything, never caused $1 billion in damage. They're being treated as domestic terrorists. Kennedy's voice rose slightly. Meanwhile, you sit on your committee. You enrich your family. You lecture everyone about democracy and justice. And you face absolutely no consequences for decades of encouraging the exact behavior you now condemn. Waters finally found her voice. I have always fought for justice. You fought for selective justice. Kennedy corrected. Justice for people who agree with you. Harsh punishment for everyone else. That's not justice. That's tyranny. He opened the fourth folder. And speaking of selective justice, let's talk about your relationship with cop killers and communist dictators. Kennedy's expression had turned grave. This was no longer about money or hypocrisy. This was about something deeper. Congresswoman Waters, let me ask you a simple question. Do you believe in the rule of law? Waters straightened. Of course I do. Do you believe that people who murder police officers should be brought to justice? What kind of question? It's a simple question. Yes or no? Should cop killers face justice in a fair system? Yes, but no buts. Just yes or no? Yes. Kennedy pulled out a photograph. This is New Jersey State Trooper Vera Forrester, 34 years old. Married, father of young children. On May 2, 1973, he and his partner pulled over a vehicle on the New Jersey Turnpike. Inside were 3 members of the Black Liberation Army. A shootout occurred. He pulled out crime scene photos. Showing them briefly, Trooper Forrester was shot execution-style at point-blank range while he lay wounded on the ground. One of the shooters was Joanne Chesimard, also known as Assata Shakur. She was captured, tried, and convicted of first-degree murder in '77. Sentenced to life in prison. Kennedy paused. In 1979, members of the BLA broke her out of prison. She fled to Cuba where Fidel Castro gave her asylum. She's been there ever since. She's on the FBI's most wanted list. There's a $2 million reward for information leading to her capture. She's wanted for the murder of a law enforcement officer. He looked directly at Waters. And you visited her multiple times. The room gasped. Kennedy pulled out travel records. You've made multiple trips to Cuba to visit Assata Shakur. In 1998, you wrote a letter to Fidel Castro, not asking him to return this fugitive to face justice, not expressing concern for Trooper Forres's family. No, you asked Castro not to extradite her. You called her a political activist. You described her as someone fleeing political persecution. He read from Waters's letter. I am writing to urge you not to extradite Assata Shakur to the United States. As you know, she has been targeted by the U.S. government for her political beliefs and activism. Kennedy set down the letter. Political beliefs. She executed a state trooper. She was convicted by a jury of her peers. She exhausted her appeals. And you lobbied a communist dictator to keep her from facing justice. He pulled up a photograph of Trooper Forres's widow and children. Rose Forrester raised her children without their father because your friend murdered him. Those children grew up without a dad because Assata Shakur shot him execution-style and you called her a political activist. Kennedy's voice was shaking slightly with controlled anger. The New Jersey State Troopers Union has condemned you. Trooper Forres's family has begged for justice for 50 years. And you use your congressional platform to protect their father's killer. He pulled out more documents. But Assata Shakur isn't your only questionable friend in Cuba. Let's talk about your relationship with Fidel Castro. He displayed the 1998 letter again. You praised Castro's policy proposals. You thanked him for helping people fleeing political persecution. You called for an end to the U.S. embargo. You criticized American efforts to overthrow his regime. Kennedy listed Castro's crimes. Fidel Castro executed thousands of political prisoners. He jailed dissidents for decades. He destroyed Cuba's economy. He ran a police state where speaking out could get you disappeared. Gay people were persecuted. Journalists were imprisoned. Religious believers were oppressed. He held up photos of Castro meeting with Waters. While Cubans risked their lives on rafts to escape his regime, you were smiling and shaking hands with him. While Cuban dissident rotted in prison, you were praising his policies. While families mourned their executed loved ones, you were lobbying to end the embargo that might have pressured him to reform. Kennedy pulled out another document. And let's not forget your claim that the CIA sold crack cocaine in black neighborhoods. You made this accusation in 1996. Demanded investigations. Held hearings. The investigations found no evidence. Zero. Nothing. But did you apologize for smearing the CIA? Did you acknowledge you were wrong? No. You doubled down. You kept making the accusation. You fundraised off it. You built your reputation partly on an evidence-free conspiracy theory. He shook his head. So, let me understand your moral framework. Congresswoman, a cop killer living in luxury in Cuba. She's a political activist who deserves protection. Communist dictators who murder their own people. They're worth praising and defending. The CIA, they're drug dealers even though there's no evidence. But people who entered the Capitol on January 6th, they're terrorists who should never see daylight again. Kennedy pulled out his reading glasses and put them back on his folksy manner. Returning like a weapon. You know what really gets me? You use your famous phrase, reclaiming my time. You say it to cut people off, to assert your authority to control the narrative. But Trooper Vera Forrester had his time stolen. All of it, every second he should have had with his children, his grandchildren. He never got to meet the retirement he never got to enjoy. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. But everyone heard it. You can't reclaim time for Trooper Forrester. Assata Shakur took all his time and you help her keep it by protecting her from justice. Waters tried to respond, her voice breaking. Asada was denied a fair trial. She was convicted by a jury. She exhausted all her appeals. Every court that reviewed the case upheld the conviction. But facts don't matter to you. Do they? What matters is your narrative, your politics, your fundraising. Kennedy closed that folder and opened his final one. Let's talk about where all this corruption and selective justice has led you. Let's talk about your $4.5 million mansion. Kennedy stood up for the first time in the hearing. He was taller than he looked sitting down, and his posture was straighter than his fully demeanor suggested. He was no longer pretending to be confused. Congresswoman Waters, you've accused me of being out of touch with working people. You've talked about your humble roots, your rise from poverty. You've made a career out of claiming to represent the poor and the powerless. He pulled up an aerial photograph. This is your house, Hancock Park, Los Angeles. Purchased in 2004 for $2.80, $8 million. Current estimated value $4.50 to $5 million. 6 bedrooms, 5,600 square feet, pool, separate guest house. Property taxes alone are over $40 a year. Maintenance and upkeep another $100 annually. The photograph rotated, showing the mansion from multiple angles. Beautiful home, really beautiful. I'm happy for your success. But I have some questions about the math. Kennedy pulled up a financial chart. Congressional salary today is $174 a year. You've been in Congress since 1991. That's 33 years. In the early years, the salary was less, around $130. Even being generous and averaging it out, your total congressional salary over your career is approximately $5.7 million before taxes. He did the calculation on screen. Federal taxes, state taxes, local taxes. You're probably taking home about 55–60% of that. So roughly $3.1 to $3.4 million over 33 years. That's your net congressional income after taxes. He pulled up property records. But you bought this $2.8 million house in 2004. That's just 13 years into your congressional career. Even if you never spent a single dollar on food, clothes, travel, or anything else, which obviously you did, you couldn't have saved enough for a $2.80 $8 million house from congressional salary alone. Kennedy displayed a mortgage document. To buy this house, you would have needed at least a $560 down payment. 20%. In 2004, your congressional salary was about $158.000 a year. Even if you saved every penny for 3 or 4 years, which is impossible, you couldn't have made that down payment from salary alone. He turned to face Waters directly. So where did the money come from? When she didn't answer, he provided a timeline. 2003, your daughter Karen Waters' company starts receiving major payments from your campaign. First year, $123. 2004, you buy the mansion for $2.8 million. 2004, your husband joins the board of One United Bank. 2005 to 2008. One United board position continues. Your husband's stock holdings grow. 2008, you arrange the One United bailout. Your husband's stock is saved from becoming worthless. 2009 to 2019. Karen Waters receives over $1.20, $2 million more from your campaigns. The timeline appeared on screen. The dates and money amounts connecting like a web. It's a pattern. Congresswoman, every time your family needs money, there's a convenient arrangement through your political position. Your daughter gets campaign contracts at inflated rates. Your husband gets on a bank board and you arrange its bailout. Your grandson gets hired as your chief of staff at premium salary. Kennedy pulled up another image. This time a split screen. On one side, Waters' mansion in Hancock Park. On the other side, statistics from California's 43rd Congressional District. Your district congresswoman, the one you claim to represent. Median household income, $39. Poverty rate, 23%. Unemployment 12%. Over 15.000 homeless people. Some of the worst public schools in California. The contrast was stark and damning. But here's the really interesting part. Kennedy said, zooming in on the map. Your mansion isn't even in your district. It's in Hancock Park, 15 miles away. One of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Los Angeles. He let that sink in. You don't live with the people you represent. You don't live in their neighborhoods. Send your kids to their schools. Shop in their stores. You live in a mansion in a rich neighborhood far away from the poverty you claim to fight. Kennedy pulled out one more document. Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington didn't just name you one of the most corrupt members of Congress once. They did it 4 times. 2005, 2006, 2009, and 2011. Each time they cited a pattern of using your position to enrich your family. He displayed their reports. 2005 Rep. Waters has used her position to direct millions of dollars to an organization run by her family members. 2006 Rep. Waters again used her position to financially benefit her family. 2009 Rep. Waters' intervention on behalf of One United Bank raises serious questions about her commitment to ethical standards. 2011 Representative Waters continues to blur the line between her official duties and her family's financial interests. Kennedy set down the reports 4 times, not partisan attacks. These are from a watchdog group. They documented a pattern of corruption spanning over a decade. He walked closer to the witness table. Congresswoman Waters, I've been in public service for a long time. I've seen politicians who genuinely care about their constituents. I've seen people who make sacrifices to serve. And I've seen people who use public office to enrich themselves while wrapping it all in the language of social justice. His voice was steady prosecutorial. You've spent 33 years in Congress. Your district is still poor. Your constituents still struggle. Homelessness has gotten worse, not better. The schools are still failing. The unemployment is still high. But the Waters family is doing great. Your daughter is a millionaire from campaign contracts. Your husband has profited from consulting arrangements. Your grandson has made over $1 million in salary. You live in a mansion worth $4.5 million. Kennedy returned to his seat. But he didn't sit down. You called me out of touch this morning. You mocked my accent, my education, my state. You said I keep Louisiana poor. Well, Congresswoman, Louisiana's poverty rate is 18.6%. Your district's is 23%. I'd say you're not in a position to lecture anyone. He picked up all his folders. These documents contain evidence of financial corruption, conflict of interest, campaign finance violations enriching your family through your office, and potential tax evasion. I'm submitting them to the Department of Justice for investigation. Waters finally found her voice weak and desperate. This is a political hit job. You're attacking me because I'm a powerful black woman who number. Ma'am, Kennedy interrupted, his voice firm. I'm holding you accountable because you're a corrupt politician who used her race as a shield while robbing the very people she claimed to represent. He looked around the hearing room. For decades, Congresswoman Waters has lectured us about justice, about helping the poor, about standing up to the powerful. But when we look at what she's actually done, we see something very different. We see a politician who enriched her family while her constituents stayed poor. Who protected cop killers while condemning cops? Who praised dictators while wrapping herself in the American flag? Who incited violence and then condemned it? Who used her position for personal gain and called it public service? Kennedy's voice was quiet now, but it carried across the room. In Louisiana, we have an old saying. You can't get clean by pointing out everyone else's dirt. Congresswoman Waters has spent 33 years pointing at everyone else's dirt while she rolled around in her own. He addressed the chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that we forward these materials to the appropriate authorities for investigation. The American people deserve to know how their representatives are enriching themselves. And the people of California's 43rd District deserve better than a representative who lives in a mansion while they struggle to survive. Waters stood up shakily, her lawyer supporting her arm. For the first time all day, she had nothing to say. The woman who'd made a career out of reclaiming her time had finally run out of words. As she left the hearing room, Kennedy sat back down, putting his reading glasses back on, and returning to his doodling as if nothing significant had happened. But everyone in that room knew something very significant had just happened. The gator had finally met her match. The video of the hearing went viral within hours. Not Waters' planned social media assault on Kennedy that had been deleted, but the full footage of her systematic takedown. Waters exposed trended worldwide for 3 days straight. Within a week, the Department of Justice announced a formal investigation into Waters' financial dealings. The FBI raided both her district office and her Washington office. Removing boxes of documents, the IRS announced an audit of Waters' finances going back 15 years. One United Bank's former CEO Kevin Cohey agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for immunity. Sidney Williams's consulting clients were all subpoenaed. Karen Waters's Progressive Connections had its bank accounts frozen pending investigation. But perhaps the most dramatic fallout came from her own district. Town halls erupted with angry constituents demanding answers. "Where's our $4.5 million?" became a rallying cry. Community leaders who had supported Waters for decades called for her resignation. A recall petition gathered 40,000 signatures in 10 days. Her approval rating in her own district collapsed from 71% to 34% in 1 month. 3 challengers announced primary campaigns and one raised $2 million in the first week. The House Ethics Committee, under pressure from both parties, was forced to reopen its investigation. The 2-year delay that had protected her before wouldn't work this time. The evidence was public now, and the pressure was too great. Nancy Pelosi, who had defended Waters for years, released a carefully worded statement. "These are serious allegations that require serious investigation. No one is above accountability." The Congressional Black Caucus split. Some members defended Waters, calling the investigation racist, but others quietly said it was time for new leadership. "We can fight for justice and also have integrity," one member told reporters on Background. Even some of her media allies couldn't defend her. When presented with the evidence Kennedy had compiled, they fell silent or offered weak deflections. 6 months later, federal indictments were expected. Waters faced potential charges of bank fraud, campaign finance violations, bribery, ethics violations, and tax evasion. Legal experts estimated she could face 20 years if convicted on all counts. Her mansion in Hancock Park went up for sale. As for Senator John Kennedy, he returned to Louisiana, where he was spotted the following Saturday morning at his favorite fishing spot on the bayou teaching his grandson how to tie a lure. When a reporter tracked him down and asked about the Waters hearing, Kennedy just smiled that gentle smile. "Sometimes the biggest gators think they can't be caught," he said, casting his line into the murky water. "They get comfortable, arrogant even. They think they own the whole swamp." He reeled in slowly, the early morning mist rising around him. But every gator meets their match eventually. Sometimes it's another gator. Sometimes it's a hunter, and sometimes, he chuckled, it's just a simple country lawyer with a fishing line. The line went taut. Something had taken the bait. "Justice moves slow in these waters," Kennedy said, starting to reel in his catch. "But it moves. Eventually. It always moves." Back in Washington, Maxine Waters sat in her office, surrounded by lawyers, staring at the criminal referral documents. Her phone wasn't ringing with offers of support. Her social media mentions were brutal. Her staff was updating their resumes. For 33 years, she had used her position to enrich her family while lecturing others about justice. For 33 years, she had protected cop killers while condemning cops. For 33 years, she had lived in luxury while her constituents suffered. And she had gotten away with it by playing the victim, by accusing anyone who questioned her of racism, by wrapping her corruption in the language of social justice. But John Kennedy had done something no one else had been willing to do. He had pulled back the curtain. He had shown the receipts. He had connected the dots in a way that even her most loyal supporters couldn't ignore. In Louisiana, they say in the bayou, you can't outrun the truth. Maxine Waters was learning that lesson the hard way. And somewhere in Louisiana, Senator Kennedy was cleaning his catch and thinking about what to have for dinner. His work done justice.